everybody. Dennis Labriola here, author of Seventh Inning Stretch, Reflections on the Game of Life. And I want to just have you come back on. I thank you so much for coming back on for another episode of Seventh Inning Stretch, the podcast. And this is where we talk about our relationships. They can be really complicated, right? But they're so impactful too. And that's kind of what my book is about. But, today I thought we would talk a little bit about a lifelong relationship, and that is a relationship between a parent and a child. And I'm so happy to have a guest today who is, in my opinion, an expert on this. She's wrote several books on the subject. I want to hear from her. Her name is Arlyn Lawrence, all right, and she is the editor-in-chief of Inspira Literary Solutions, and that is a literary service and publishing support company. She has been an editor, and she is an author and co-author of numerous books and curricular resources, and that she's been published and distributed around the world. Kind of amazing, right? And some of her books, just listen to these titles. Listen to some of these titles. They're great. Prayer Saturated Kids. All right. How about this one? Pray Kids, a hands-on guide for developing kids who pray. Wow. How about What I Wish I Knew at 18, Leadership and Life Skills Curriculum? Really important. I wish I knew something at 18, right? And Parenting for the Launch, Raising Teens to Succeed in the Real World. And most recently, she did Encounters at the Well. It's a journey to joy and freedom. It's a devotional Bible study for women. Wow. She lives in Puget Sound out in Washington State. I'm in New York. She's in Washington. We got the whole country covered, right? And she lives there with her husband, Doug. She has 5 adult children. And as she puts it, a growing brood of grandchildren. Yeah, me too. So that's really good. Oh, I also almost forgot. She is the editor of my book, the future bestseller, Seventh Inning Stretch. I had to put that in. I'm sorry, And but I just want to welcome you. Please welcome Arlyn Lawrence. Hello.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to be doing this with you.
Well,
it's a collaboration for us, right?
Yeah, I know. This is really good. I'm so glad that we've come to know each other over the last, I guess, 3 years or so that we've been working together.
That's right.
And really great, great stuff. And and I know that I look at, and one of the things I do as a men's minister, I talk to a lot of men about stuff that they deal with, and a lot of it comes up to parenting stuff. I mean, I wish that we were a lot better at it before we became parents, and it could really look different, from one family to another. I mean, our culture is really wild. So
isn't it great having grandkids? Don't they say that it's so great having grandkids? We wish we would have done it first.
Yeah, it's so much better.
How great it was.
It's so much better.
We have 12. When I say growing, it's because they keep arriving, but we've got 12.
Yeah. Well, I only have 4. All right, but my eldest granddaughter just got married, so we'll see what happens with that, And but anyway, and one of the things I liked about reading some of the books and stuff that you had is that you really have taken a lifelong approach dealing with kids when they were young. I remember when my daughter, who's now 46, when she was 6 months old, and my wife at that point said, we need to pray for her husband. And I said, she's only 6 months old. I mean, she's not even out of diapers yet. And, but something that I had to learn, and parenting can be really difficult, and especially when we go through all the stages, with our kids. And so I just thought that maybe, you can kind of maybe just speak about that. And then I like to find out a little bit more about some of these books that you have.
Well, I'm going to just jump right onto something you just said about praying for your daughter's husband when she was only 6 months old. And I think that's been really key for our family. Both my husband and I come from Christian families. His multiple generations, my parents became Christians when I was really young. And his great grandparents, but so multiple generations. And, you know, one of the things we've noticed is we kind of always seem to land on our feet. And we've always chalked that up to the fact that we had praying parents. And I've seen that in my kids' lives and in the lives of other families where you have parents who are committed to praying for their kids. And, you know, we don't always know how all that works. We do know we live in a world that has a physical realm and a spiritual realm.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in one realm affects what happens in the other. And the time that we put in our knees, I think exponentially pays fruit in ways that we don't even know. So that's probably key principle number one for me.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, for me, you know, I mean, I grew up, you know, kind of a traditional church type situation. And then I had a personal encounter with, you know, with the Lord Jesus. It was after I was married.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of things that I didn't really, I was pretty ignorant when it came to spiritual things until that time. And, you know, and I think that, you know, one of the things I always ask the guys, I'm like, you know, so what's the one thing that we pray for the most? And 90% of the time, the guys will say, "Oh, my kids." Right? We're always praying about our kids, and it really doesn't stop. So, you know, so you have this book, Prayerful Saturated Kids. Obviously,
Graduated kids, yeah.
yeah, you've learned this and you've applied it. You know, give me a little bit about how that actually, you know, what the book is about and maybe how it worked with you.
This is what it looks like. It's Prayer Saturated Kids. I actually co-wrote it with a ministry colleague and good friend, Cheryl Sachs, who's written a number of other books on prayer and praying with families. So she's a great resource to look up. And, you know, it starts right off the bat about praying about your child's original design, like who did God make them to be, not who do we want them to be.
Mm.
And that was a key thing for my husband Doug as me as well when we were raising our kids, to keep asking God, okay, God, who did you make this child to be? Because like scripture, when you look back through the scriptures, you talk like Jeremiah, God says, before you were even formed in the womb, I saw you, I knew you, I called you as a prophet to the nations. You know, David said in the Psalms, before there was my unformed substance, you saw me and you knew the days that were ordained for me before there was one of them. That's the Arlyn paraphrase. But multiple times, like Samson and John the Baptist and even Jesus, there was foreknowledge before the child was even conceived of who God had designed that child to be. So we've always tried to ask God to show us in many ways, whether just, you know, as we're praying to bring to our mind, we see it as they're growing up, their inclinations, their little personalities, their temperaments, their their instincts and interests. Who did God design them to be? And then praying for that to come to fruition,
Yeah.
and not having a one size fits all mentality parenting style, because how you parent each child according to their original design is going to look different because they're
Yeah.
different.
Well, yeah, and they are, and that's a great point. They're so different. I mean, you know, I only had one daughter, so I didn't have anyone to. I'm very unique because I have one daughter from my first wife, and you know, and she went on to glory back in 2005. And I met Patty, and Patty had a daughter, and you know, so I have two only daughters. So very unique situation having two only kids, right? You know, they both say, "Well, I'm an only child." Yeah, well, I have two only childs. So,
You
but
do.
yeah, so but when I found is that when my daughter started, you know, giving me granddaughters, I have four granddaughters. Um, they are so different from each other, so different, and it's you know, to a point where like it's like, you know, like where did you come from, you know? But isn't that a wonderful thing that God does? I mean, he, like you say, he touches each one individually, and there's only one of them in the
Yeah,
entire universe. Pretty
that's right.
amazing. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Wow. That
You know,
so
and the other thing is too, we always tried to make prayer our first response and not our last resort. That's another key principle that comes out in Prayer Saturated Kids, to make prayer your first response and not your last resort, because it makes such a radical difference. And we have so many stories. The other thing about raising your kids in a prayerful home is that, you know, when they grow up, and they will inevitably go through a time of challenging their faith and making their parents' religion their relationship. Every person goes through that. I went through that. My husband went through that. You know, what do I really believe? What's my relationship with Jesus? If you have grown up seeing radical answers to prayer your whole life, you're going to have a lot easier time in making that faith your own. You know, one of my favorite stories about that was when our youngest was about 5, and she had a fever in the middle of the night. And she came into our bedroom and she said, you know, I'm sick, I don't feel good, my head hurts, and she was burning up. And so we made a little bed for her on the side of the bed, and laid her down, got her a wet washcloth for her head, and all of the practical, natural things that you would do. And she laid down on my husband's side of the bed with a little bed on the floor. And so we're laying there in the dark, and this little plaintive voice comes up out of the darkness, and she says, I just need someone to pray for me. And we're like, ah. So, you know, Doug reaches his hand down by the side of the bed and grabs her little hand, and just, actually in that case, you know, we remembered the story in the Bible where Jesus rebuked the fever in Peter's mother-in-law. And so he did that. And he just said, I rebuke this fever in Jesus' name. I pray healing over Hillary. And she drifted off to sleep, and she was fine in the morning. And that's just one tiny little story, but a lifetime of those stories over and over again, seeing God work, deliver us, you know, from all kinds of things, you know, financial things that we went through. And we'd gather all the kids around and we'd pray as a family, and God would come through and something amazing would happen. And so we've raised kids who they're all on their own journeys, but they all have a strong value for answered prayer, for sure.
Yeah. And obviously you've taught your children how to pray as well. And, you know, and that was something that I think is so important, because, you know, because we're not always with them all the time. And as they grow, and if we teach them when they're young, then they get into that particular habit. You know, I remember a story. It didn't make my book, but maybe the next book. But I remember a story where my daughter was about 7, I guess, and you know, and she wanted a bunny rabbit as a pet. So I really wasn't into having a bunny rabbit as a pet, you know. So I did the cop out thing. I'm like, well, listen, you pray, and if the Lord Jesus wants you to have a rabbit, all right, then he'll give it to you, right?
Uh-oh.
All right. So she did. She went in and she prayed. And about 2 nights later, we're sitting down in my den, and it was pouring rain outside, and the light from the kitchen was shining on the back lawn. So there's this little square of this light, and sitting in the middle of this light is a white rabbit sitting there. And she said, Dad, Jesus gave me a bunny rabbit. You have to go get him. It's raining. And I'm like, what do you say? So it's like, absolutely. So we went out and we got this rabbit, and we had a bunny rabbit as a pet. So, you know, and, you know, so, you know,
faith of a child.
Yeah, it is. It's faith of a child. And, you know, and, you know, and I probably had the biggest lesson at that time. And isn't that how, you know, that works so much, you know? So, yeah, so prayer is really, really great. And it also, I believe that it also helps to direct them, I guess, or impact them to become, as they become more mature, to, you know, to take their faith as a reality in their life. You know, you find that, you must find that too, right?
Absolutely. And also to learn to hear God's voice, and to learn to exercise discernment, to grow in discernment. Like, those are spiritual tools that our kids need to navigate life. Like, I hope that they will be able to exercise discernment, so that when they're going into unsafe situations or scary situations, or who to trust and who not to trust, that they learn to recognize God's voice. One story, when our daughter hadn't been driving very long, she was driving along, she was on the freeway, and she had a sense that she was supposed to change lanes, and she felt like, she would have articulated this, felt like the Lord was telling her, move lanes, move over. And she's like, everything's fine. Why do I need to move over? Just this sense, move over, move over. So she changed lanes. And right after she changed lanes, the car in front of her was towing a trailer, and the trailer separated from the car, and
Wow.
she would have been struck by that errant trailer if she'd not moved over, and it ended up going into the median, and thankfully nobody was hurt, including her. But just like, again, just a small sample of training your kids so that in those moments where you're not there, like you pointed out, right, they know what the voice of the Lord sounds like.
Yeah, that's really important. And, it's really important. So often we're looking, we want to know what God's will is for our life. And God is really willing. I found that he's really willing to share that with us. We just need to listen. And, and he will share a lot of things with us. So, so that's, something that I did with my kids, as well. Now, the second book that you have, I find it, it's a great title, Parenting for the Launch. Because listen, we all want our kids to grow up. We all want them to be successful, to be mature, to have great independent lives, to marry well, to, all of the success that we want, but I got to be honest with you. When the kids are in their teens, sometimes you wonder, like, I don't think you're really something, it was funny because we happened to catch an old movie last night called The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The
Oh
original,
my God, I
the
remember
original
that.
one. Yeah. And I'm sure that there were times when I thought that must have been a real thing when, going through some of the teen years. And, and when Patty and I were married, Stephanie was young. She was just getting into her teen years. And like any teen, there was definitely times when, where it was either like, let's maybe we can run away and leave her here, or something, but
most parents can relate.
yeah, right. It's true. And but they get through that. But I said, listen, I know how terrible it seems, but I've already survived this once. I'm pretty confident we'll survive it again. And so tell me a little bit about this book, Parenting for the Launch.
Well, here's Parenting for the Launch, Raising Teens to Succeed in the Real World. Also wrote this with a colleague and friend, Dennis Tratine. And if I had to kind of share what some of the keys were in that book, it would be really, for one, having a strong relational foundation with our kids, parenting from out of relationship, like valuing their uniqueness and affirming their worth. Again, not coming from what my outcome is, but who is this person and who am I placed in their life to help them become? And that takes a lot of self-awareness for us as parents. Many times our knee-jerk reaction is to parent the way we were parented, whether that's authoritarianism, because I said so, maybe in your generation, my generation, because I said so was a common answer, instead of really looking at, okay, the uniqueness of the situation, the uniqueness of the child, my personality, how it interacts with their personality. One of the models that I share in the book, and you may be familiar with it, is the DISC personality model, which I think works great for parenting because you can very quickly assess if a person is people-oriented or task-oriented, and if they're fast-paced or if they're slow-paced. And based on where they fall on that continuum, are they a D, a dominant, an I, an influencer, an S, a steady, stable, or a C, conscientious, compliant? And just understanding how the different personalities interact with one another. So if you have a child who is a high I, who tends to be super fun. They're about having a good time. They're maybe not as organized. They don't tend to always follow through. They're the life of the party. And you have a parent who's the high C, the conscientious compliant, all their ducks are in a row, things are organized, they're very detail oriented. You are going to have sparks because your high I child is like, Mom, you never want to have fun. You're just so serious all the time. And the high C parent is like, why can't you keep your room clean? You're never on time. And
Yeah.
and that can actually, turn into a disaster if you turn against each other in criticism. You're a disaster, you're no fun. And instead, if we can stand back and reframe our communication and say, wow, I love this about you, that you are so fun. And I understand, though, that it means that you are not always thinking about all the things that need to be done.
Mhm.
Can I help you by, let's take an extra half hour before we leave in the house to make sure that we have everything so we're not forgetting anything. If you're doing it in a mutually respectful way that honors the other person's design, that is so helpful during those teen years
Yeah.
when emotions are high anyways and communication is difficult. So it can help you understand one another and keep your communication respectful and honoring. And that goes such a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that I don't have many regrets in my life because I believe that all the events of my life are somewhat preordained, that God knows about them. And, but I'll
Mhm.
say that the places where I do have regret are places where I didn't parent well. Or there was something that, to give you an example, my daughter was a good student, kind of like a B plus type student, and even an A minus student. So she was a good student. And, and she would come and she would say, gee, Dad, I got a 94 on that test. And I
Mhm.
was like, wow, that's great. How come you didn't get 100?
Mhm.
And I was doing it in a joking fashion, but she was taking it kind of seriously,
Mhm.
and it impacted her.
Mhm.
And it's something that we've discussed it as an adult. We discussed it with her because, and I apologized for the fact that, I wasn't reading her correctly. And that's kind of what you were saying, another thing that I think could be valuable too, perhaps our audience has even seen that, is, you know, the five love languages.
Oh, for
Um,
sure.
that's something that, that a lot of couples use,
Mhm.
but it's also helpful to use it with,
Mhm.
I'm going to say your teenage kids, maybe 13, they're old enough to understand that book. It's not a very complicated book for us to understand how they want to be loved,
Mhm.
so that we are loving them in the right fashion. Did you, is that any experience with that type of thing?
Oh, absolutely. And it's very similar to the DISC. I mean, it's
Yeah.
understanding how your child is uniquely wired. And it goes two ways too. And in giving them grace, knowing that they will react to you based on their individual wiring,
Mm,
but as we're the adults, the onus is on us to be unoffendable. So if my child doesn't communicate to me in my love language, if my love language, to your point, is words of affirmation, and I never get any words of affirmation from my teenager, like you will rarely get words of
yeah.
affirmation from the best of teenagers. I mean, they're young, they're very self-absorbed.
Yeah.
Um, and in that case, we also have to be unoffendable, and give grace. And if it's something that's truly hurtful, to again have an honoring conversation without lashing out of our own hurts. That many times we have our own wounds, maybe because of past relationships, the way
Sure.
we were raised, just levels of brokenness in our own lives that make us tender. And when our immature children disappoint us or offend us, we can lash out at them and create relational difficulty there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's another way that that understanding, being self-aware of ourselves
Hmm.
can help protect and nurture that relationship with our kids during those very vulnerable years.
Yeah. What about the single parent? I run into a lot of people, single parents. Their marriage didn't work out, or whatever the situation may have been. Um, I
Yeah,
mean, you know,
that is,
I mean,
they deserve a
two of us
heartbeat.
parenting is hard enough, you know?
I know, right? Yeah, with single parents, and I've had friends that were single parents. I've had families in our church that I've known that have been single parents. And one of my strongest encouragement for them is to find someone that will be your sounding board. Maybe it's a parent, your own parent, or a sibling, or a close friend, or a mentor, that you can have some of those conversations that you might have with a spouse, so that they're your front line of communication and you're not reacting to your child or not taking out things on your child that really need to be dealt with on a adult level.
Yeah.
I think sometimes single parents can get sucked into almost a junior high sibling
Yeah.
relationship with
Yeah.
their child, arguing, bickering, tit for tat, becoming offended, manipulation, the silent treatment. And that's so damaging to the parent-child relationship. So if you can remove yourself from
Mm,
that as a single parent and find someone else that maybe you can have those conversations with and be your support, as opposed to your child being that.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my
And I
thought.
think, and I'll speak especially to you dads out there.
Mhm.
I think that it's really important to have another guy or a group of guys that you can share some of these things with. I find my observation is that, women, it's much easier for them to kind of get together and to share. I don't know if I may be speaking out of turn, but that's just been my observation. But guys, we always think that, I got this. And, when we isolate ourselves, which is the worst thing,
Mhm.
for no other reason than to have somebody to pray with,
Mhm.
get a bunch of guys together, have, and, we call them SEAL teams,
Mhm.
after the Navy SEALs. And, and we have a formal group of guys that are really, really close to me. I got three other brothers that, we meet every week, and, and we have conversations, and a lot of them are about our kids. And it's not so much that my kid is terrible. It's like, they're going through something now. I just don't know how to properly handle it. Or how do I direct them correctly? And it's and a lot of times we don't know, but we know how to pray, so we can always do that.
Yeah. And
So,
dads need to know how much their kids need them, no
mm,
matter where they've been or what they've been through, or how, inadequate they feel as a dad. Just the presence of a dad statistically makes unbelievable
yeah.
difference the life of a child. And I'll just put in a plug for one of my clients. I've helped him write several books and a fatherhood curriculum. He's in Seattle, and he runs an organization called DADS, Divine Alternatives for Dad Services, in Seattle, inner city Seattle. Works with men who are coming out of addiction, incarceration, really troubled backgrounds. They may have multiple kids in multiple households. And this organization brings them together, reunites them with their kids, helps them get caught up on their child support, gives them fathering classes, gives them the SEAL team type support that you're
Mm,
talking about.
yeah.
And these guys, many of them have not had dads themselves and have no frame of reference. But when they show up in their kids' lives, amazing things happen. It's phenomenal. So
Yeah.
yeah, dads are so important.
Great, great. I think this past month, I've probably been through probably 3 or 4 graduations, whether it be
Mhm.
high school or college, or what have you. And I know that you have another book
Mhm.
called Wings, Not Strings:
Yeah,
Parenting Strategies to Let Go with Confidence. Letting go is hard.
I know.
And I know that you have, especially for moms, right? I mean, wow.
Yeah, it's hard for everybody, but I think as moms, we tend to wrap up our identity in being a mom,
Mm,
and caring for our household, managing our household, caring for our children, making sure they have everything that they need. We just tend to, again, I know I'm speaking very, very generally, and different people have different giftings, but by and large, women do tend to struggle the most when it comes time for the kids to leave the nest because their identity is there.
Mm.
And I think my special, close to my heart message to moms is to always, throughout your life, be remembering who you are and taking time for yourself and the things that make you happy and fulfilled. And remember, I talked about our children having an original design, who God created them and called them to be, and having a unique purpose for their lives. You have a unique and original design and destiny and calling on your life. And it includes parenting your children, but it's not exclusive to that.
Mm.
And when that time comes that you are freed up to a certain extent as your kids move out into the world, we want to give them wings, not strings. We don't want to keep them tied to us because we need them for our sense of identity or our sense of fulfillment. We need to be able to let them go and to create their own pathways and become who God made them to be. And then we need to find that pathway for ourselves. And it's actually a very exciting time of life when
Yeah.
you do get to give your kids wings and you do have more time to be able to explore those things that give you joy and
Mhm.
to do those things that God's called you to do uniquely. So,
Yeah, and I think you know, s- sometimes our kids even surprise us as they
mm,
grow. I remember when my daughter was first getting married, and she told me that her and my son-in-law were expecting their first child.
mm.
And my mind went immediately to how messy her room used to be. And I said, my Lord, they're going to lose this baby. But no, but her house was great. She was a great mom. Where this all came from, you know, um, God's grace and God and God's mercy. So,
And along that lines, it can be the whole wings not strings title has to do with the whole helicopter parenting movement that we see also, of
mm,
the hyper vigilant parent that's always there hovering, the one that's always there for everything at school and making sure that the child has a tissue
yeah,
and chasing along behind, and then as they're going through school, just constantly being there and trying to micromanage every aspect of the child's life. And the problem with that is then the child never develops the muscle memory and the practice, or even the experience of failing,
yeah,
and then needing to develop strong, intestinal fortitude, we used to say, right?
yeah.
Uh,
You
y-
have
you
to
know,
fail. There's more lessons learning when we fail than when we win. So,
yes. And
yeah.
one of our kids, we used to call him, when he was in high school, we used to call him Mr. 2.0,
Mm.
because for our car insurance, they had to have a 2.0 in order to get car insurance.
Ah,
So sadly, that was his highest goal. And of course, we knew that he was capable of so much more.
yeah.
Well, was I going to hover and browbeat and make sure that he accomplished that? And you know what he said to me once? He said, Mom, I'm going to go to university. I'll pay attention when it counts. Well, now that's not the attitude that I want him to have. I wanted him to be diligent. I wanted him to have aspirations
Mm.
while he was in high school. But you know what? I thought, he needs to own this one. And sure enough, he did go to college,
Mhm.
and he graduated in 3 years with a double major
Wow.
because he cared, and
Yeah.
he needed to have that experience to be who he wanted to be. And
Yeah.
I could have been that hovering mom that kept him in every night and made sure that he got a 4.0,
Mm.
but I'm actually really glad I didn't do that.
Well, because he was able to do it on his own, and he was able to, I was kind of the same way. I was a C student all through high school. I got to college, and I became an A student in college because I was paying for college actually. So I guess I wanted to get as much for my money as I could. But it becomes more important that that your motivation changes. So wow, really, really good. So in closing, I just wanted to talk a little bit about so many parents. Maybe you can give us a little bit of wisdom here as we kind of wrap this up. I know that so many parents have real difficulties in figuring out how to parent. Um, I know that, from the dad perspective, there are some dads that they're either so focused on career that even though they're physically there, they're not really there. Some of them really disengaged. Some of them, of course, aren't physically there. I know that moms kind of can do the same thing. They can, for one reason or another, especially now, more women are career oriented, and nothing wrong with that. But God has us all in this place. He wants us to take care of all of it and do it the right way. So if someone's having a real difficulty, I mean, obviously, buy her books, buy all these books. That's the first thing. They're available wherever books are sold. So that's the first thing. But I'm sure that there's great counselors that can help with this too, either through the schools or through the church. Anything you can share on that regard?
I would, if you are involved in a church, absolutely start there. If you are not in a church family, I would still start there and look for one, maybe someone who has a recommendation. And the reason I say that, I want to go back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. We live in a world with one realm and one world with two realms. The physical realm that we see and we experience with our five senses, and the spiritual realm that we experience with our spirit. And what happens in one affects what happens in the other. So what is happening in your parenting and in your family is not just physical and physiological and psychological. It is also spiritual. So I would encourage everyone to consider both aspects. Of course, there's wonderful counselors and therapists out there that can help. Other books besides mine, depending on what your particular issue is with your family, and communication tools. I really encourage, if you are married, to be in unity as a parenting team. If you are not married to the parent of your child, if you're divorced, or weren't married, to still, if that's possible, for the sake of the children, to have unity on the parenting team, to be able to come together around the child. But the other thing is unconditional love goes a long way. And I don't mean an anything goes kind of unconditional love, but I mean the kind that where your door is always open, where you're the bigger person, where you can give grace, where you can always keep the door open and be unoffendable. Even if you're busy, you can always find time to have an open door and to have conversations. And I think what happens many times is, whether through absence or intimidation or frustration or offense or inadequacy, we stop talking and we retreat into our rooms or onto our devices, and we don't talk anymore. And we need to get talking again. We need to open our doors and put our devices down and talk face to face to one another, be vulnerable, be humble, seek to understand, not to be right. And all of that can go a long way.
Yeah. Even having dinner together.
Yes, for sure. I'm a
I
big
always tell
Ashley
people
fan.
once a week, minimum, once a week, if not every day, once a week at least, have dinner all together. You'd be surprised what you could all talk about and how wonderful that time can be.
And honestly, I forget to mention that because I take it for granted, because we have always had dinner together.
Yeah.
And even in those crazy days when we had 3 kids on 3 baseball teams and my husband was coaching 2 of them, it was insane. May was just insanity around our house. I filled my freezer with freezer meals so that we'd come home from baseball and there would be an actual meal.
Yeah.
To sit around the table and talk about the day and be together.
Really important. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Ms. Arlyn Lawrence for being here today. I think that, this is really, really an important topic. I thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. And we'll put up like contact information so you could jot that down for her if you want to reach out to her, of course. Check out all of the books, that she has. And, and it's good. If you don't have a library, perfect place to start, a library. Even if you don't have kids yet, start before you have the kids. So it'll be a big help to you. So, I do one of these podcasts the first of each month. And if you find this of value, then share it with someone and tell them about it. And I'm sure, especially if they're a parent, really, really important to be able to do that. And, and you can just go to my website if you want to see this podcast or other podcasts. You go to my website, DennisLabriola.com, and you'll see there's a YouTube channel there, and you could subscribe to that. You can get to see this and other stuff that we've done in the past. So until next time, I just want to leave you with this thought. Whether you recognize it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you even believe it or not, God is and has been with you. Think about it, and God bless. Thank you so much. Arlyn, thank you for being here with us. That was great.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be with you.
Okay, bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.